Let me begin by telling you this: your life will never rise above the patterns of your thinking. You can't outperform your mindset. You can't outwork your beliefs. And you can't out-hustle a thought pattern that is sabotaging you behind the scenes. See, most people don't fail because of lack of talent, opportunity, or even resources. They fail because of the patterns they allow to repeat in their minds unchecked. Thought patterns are like invisible blueprints. They quietly design the quality of your life, your income, your relationships, your health. If you want to change the house you live in, you don't keep rearranging the furniture, you redesign the blueprint. When you start looking at your life closely, you realize that everything that keeps repeating itself is not just an accident, it's a pattern. Some people wonder why they always end up in the same kind of relationships, why they keep struggling with the same financial issues, why their confidence rises and falls like the tide. And they don't understand that what they are living is not random, it's patterned. Thought patterns create life patterns. The human brain is designed to seek familiarity. If you think the same way long enough, your brain interprets that as safety, even if those thoughts are destructive. That's why someone who grew up hearing money is hard to make will subconsciously sabotage opportunities, because the familiar pattern feels safer than the unfamiliar blessing. The problem is not lack of potential. The problem is running on outdated patterns that keep producing the same outcomes. When you understand that your mind runs like a program, you begin to realize the power you have to rewrite the code. A person may say, I want more success, but if their thought patterns are constantly saying, I'm not worthy of success, then the program will always override the desire. Desire without a change of thought produces frustration. It's like stepping on the gas with the parking brake still engaged. You feel the resistance. You hear the engine revving, but you're not moving. The brake is not outside, the brake is inside in the form of thought patterns. Once you release the inner brake, progress becomes natural. Every pattern in your life begins as a single thought. Think about how powerful that is. One thought repeated often enough becomes a belief. That belief reinforced often enough becomes your identity, and your identity dictates your behavior without you even noticing it. If you see yourself as a person who never finishes anything, then you will unconsciously find ways to quit because your mind wants to confirm the identity it has accepted. If you see yourself as someone who is disciplined, your behavior will naturally align with that. This is why you cannot underestimate the quiet patterns of thought that you repeat daily, because they are shaping who you are becoming. Most people try to change their lives by attacking the external results. They try to make more money, change their diet, or build better habits, but they never go back to the thought patterns that created the results in the first place. It's like pulling weeds out of a garden, but leaving the roots intact. The weeds always come back. The only way to change the harvest is to change the seed. The only way to change the results is to uproot the thought patterns that produce them. The beautiful thing about patterns is that they can be broken. Just because you've been thinking the same way for 20 years doesn't mean you have to think that way for the next 20. The moment you become aware that it's a pattern, you have the power to disrupt it. Disrupting patterns starts with awareness. If you don't even realize you're living in a pattern, you'll think it's fate. But once you step back and say, wait a minute, this situation looks familiar. Why do I keep reacting this way? Why do I keep attracting this result? You begin to see the hidden blueprint. That's when you can ask yourself, what thought am I repeating that keeps leading me here? Once the thought is identified, it can be challenged. Once it's challenged, it can be changed. That's how you rewrite the code. When you consciously create new thought patterns, the shift is dramatic. Instead of defaulting to fear, you rehearse courage. Instead of thinking scarcity, you rehearse abundance. Instead of telling yourself, I never get opportunities, you begin affirming, opportunities are everywhere and I'm prepared for them. At first, it may feel unnatural. Your brain will resist because it craves the comfort of the old pattern. But if you repeat the new thought long enough, the brain adopts it as the new normal. That's when the new pattern starts creating new results. The truth is that you don't need to work harder. You need to think differently. A person can work 10 times harder than someone else and still produce less if their thought patterns are laced with limitation, fear, and doubt. But when a person rewires their patterns to align with belief, discipline, and vision, even their smallest effort begins to multiply. Patterns magnify whatever you feed them. Feed them fear, and fear grows. Feed them faith, and faith grows. Feed them excuses, and excuses multiply. Feed them solutions, and opportunities multiply. The key is not whether patterns exist. They always exist. The key is whether the patterns you are running are serving you or sabotaging you. Most people live their entire lives inside the prison of assumptions that were handed down to them without ever realizing the bars are made of thoughts, not steel. An assumption is simply an idea you accepted as true without testing it. And the dangerous part is that your brain treats it as unquestionable reality. If as a child you were told that success is only for a select few, your mind builds a ceiling around your life. If you grew up hearing that people like you don't achieve big things, your decisions, your risks, and your opportunities all shrink to fit inside that small box. The limitation is not in the world around you. It's in the assumptions you never challenged. Think about how many beliefs you carry today that you never chose. Someone else handed them to you, and you just took them on because repetition felt like truth. If a teacher once said you weren't smart enough, that assumption could echo in your head every time you face a new challenge. If a parent told you money is evil, you could subconsciously push wealth away every time it starts flowing into your life. The tragedy is not that those words were spoken. The tragedy is that you built your life on them without testing whether they were even accurate. Critical thinking begins when you dare to interrogate every assumption you've been living under. When you start questioning assumptions, you discover that many of them are flimsy. They don't stand up under the weight of evidence, but they have stood unchallenged for so long that they've grown roots in your subconscious. Someone assumes they're not good at business because they failed once, but they never asked, did I fail because I lack ability? Or did I fail because I lack strategy? Another person assumes they can't be healthy because their family struggled with sickness, but they never tested the possibility that new habits could rewrite their story. The moment you apply pressure to an assumption, you find out whether it's solid rock or just smoke. One of the most dangerous things about unexamined assumptions is that they create self-fulfilling prophecies. If you assume people don't like you, you'll act defensive around others, and that defensiveness will push them away, confirming your assumption. If you assume opportunities are rare, you won't prepare for them, and when they come, you'll miss them, reinforcing your belief. In other words, the assumptions you hold shape your behavior, and your behavior creates results that look like proof of the assumption. Breaking that cycle requires the courage to step back and ask, is this actually true, or have I just been living as if it's true? Every breakthrough in history came because someone refused to accept an old assumption. People assumed the earth was flat until someone tested it. People assumed flight was impossible until someone challenged it. People assumed disease was mysterious punishment until science exposed germs. The world changes when people stop living inside the box of assumed reality. Your personal world changes the same way. If you assume you can only make as much money as your job pays, you'll never look for new ways to create value. If you assume you're stuck because of your background, you'll never look for ways to rise above it. But the moment you question the assumption, new possibilities appear. Questioning assumptions doesn't mean rejecting everything. It means demanding evidence. If you hold a belief, ask yourself, where did this come from? Who told me this? Does it serve me or does it limit me? You'll often discover that the beliefs shaping your life don't even belong to you. There's someone else's limitations you adopted as your own. Once you see that, you can decide to keep only the thoughts that align with the life you want to build. Critical thinking is the process of sifting through the noise of inherited ideas and choosing deliberately what deserves to stay. The moment you begin this practice, you shift from being controlled by your past to being in command of your future. You start seeing choices where before you only saw walls. You realize that the assumptions you lived under weren't laws. They were opinions, they weren't facts, they were patterns. And patterns, once revealed, can be changed. This is the real power of questioning assumptions. It liberates you from invisible ceilings and gives you access to a level of possibility that was always there, waiting for you to believe it could be yours. Your entire destiny can be traced back to a single invisible thread. And that thread is the way you think. Every thought you entertain is not just a passing moment in your mind, it's a seed. When that seed is repeated often enough, it sprouts into decisions, and those decisions are what form the structure of your daily life. A person doesn't suddenly wake up successful or suddenly find themselves stuck. They arrive at that place through a chain that always begins with thought. If you want to understand where you are today, you don't have to look further than the quality of the thoughts you've been carrying in the past. If you want to know where you'll end up in the future, look closely at the thoughts you're nurturing right now. Think about it this way. Thoughts are the architects of decisions. Before you choose, you imagine. Before you act, you evaluate, even if it happens in a split second. The invisible dialogue inside your mind is what pushes you toward one choice over another. Someone who constantly thinks, I'm not capable, will avoid opportunities, decline challenges, and shrink back from risks. Not because they lack talent, but because their thoughts already decided the outcome before they ever acted. On the other hand, a person who repeats thoughts of possibility will walk into situations with courage, take calculated risks, and see setbacks as stepping stones. The difference between those two lives is not intelligence or luck, it's the thought patterns that wrote the script for their decisions. Once decisions are made, they begin to crystallize into habits. Habits are simply decisions repeated until they no longer require conscious effort. Brushing your teeth every morning, reaching for your phone when you wake up, eating a certain type of food. None of these are random. They are rehearsed decisions that turned into automatic behaviors. And here's the powerful truth. Your habits are what form the framework of your life. You don't become fit by one decision to exercise. You become fit by the habit of exercising. You don't build wealth by one decision to save money. You build it by the habit of consistent saving and investing. But notice it all traces back to a thought that once whispered, This matters. Habits eventually produce results. Results are the visible evidence of the invisible chain that started in your mind. If you have results in your health, in your finances, in your relationships, those results are not random. They are the harvest of seeds planted in your thought life long ago, cultivated through decisions, watered through habits, and eventually grown into outcomes. This is why two people can be given the same opportunity and produce completely different results. The opportunity was the same, but the chain leading to the results was different because their thinking patterns were different. And then comes the part most people overlook: results accumulate into legacy. Your legacy is not what you did once, it's what you did consistently. The way people remember you is shaped by the results you left behind, and those results are nothing more than the compounded expression of your habits, decisions, and thoughts. When someone looks back at your life and says you were disciplined, generous, courageous, or impactful, what they are really saying is that your thought patterns produced a legacy that left a mark beyond your years. Legacy is just thoughts multiplied through time until they become stories others tell about you. Understanding this chain puts you back in control. If you don't like your results, you don't have to keep fighting the results. You don't have to wrestle with the fruit. You can go back to the root. You can trace the chain in reverse. If the results are unsatisfying, look at the habits that produce them. If the habits are destructive, look at the decisions that built them. If the decisions were poor, look at the thoughts that shaped those choices. And once you identify the thoughts, you can ask, do these serve the future I want, or do they sabotage it? That's the point where transformation becomes possible, because you can choose to replace the seed that starts the entire chain. Most people underestimate the weight of a single thought. They think it's just in their head, but that single thought is the beginning of a destiny. One thought repeated can either enslave you or liberate you. One thought repeated can chain you to a cycle of fear or open you to a life of boldness. The person who masters their thoughts is the person who has indirect control over every stage of the chain: their decisions, their habits, their results, and ultimately their legacy. The smallest change at the level of thought can produce the largest ripple in the course of a life. Most people live on autopilot without even realizing it. Something happens to them, and they react without thought, without pause, without examination. Their entire emotional life is chained to outside circumstances, and they don't notice that their reactions have become predictable scripts. Someone criticizes them, and they immediately shrink back or lash out. Something doesn't go their way, and they spiral into discouragement. This is the cycle of reactive thinking, and it keeps people bound to outcomes they don't want. The truth is that the quality of your life is not determined by what happens to you, but by how you process and respond to what happens to you. The ability to step out of reaction and into intention is the real difference between those who drift through life and those who shape it. Reactive thinking is the default mode of the human brain because the brain craves efficiency. It wants to conserve energy by running old patterns rather than creating new responses. That's why when you encounter a problem, your brain automatically pulls up the last reaction it used and plays it again. Whether or not that reaction serves you, if you have a habit of quitting when things get hard, your brain will suggest quitting every time difficulty arises. If you have a habit of worrying when money gets tight, your brain will present worry as the obvious choice whenever bills pile up. The cycle repeats because your brain mistakes familiarity for safety, even when familiarity is keeping you stuck. The shift happens when you start practicing proactive thinking. Proactive thinking means you insert a gap between stimulus and response, between what happens and what you decide to do about it. In that gap lies power. In that gap, you can say, I don't have to respond the same way I did last time. I can choose differently. It's the difference between being a puppet controlled by circumstances and being the author of your own story. Life will always present challenges. When you meet those challenges with intentional responses, you take control of the trajectory instead of being tossed by the waves. Proactive thinking requires you to reframe the questions you ask yourself in difficult moments. A reactive thinker asks, why does this always happen to me, and sinks deeper into frustration. A proactive thinker asks, how can I use this to grow? What can I learn from this? How do I turn this obstacle into an opportunity? The questions you ask shape the answers your brain provides, and the answers shape your choices. By upgrading your questions, you upgrade your life. Instead of seeing problems as walls, you begin to see them as doors. Instead of treating setbacks as the end, you start to treat them as training grounds. And the mark of proactive thinking is that it looks beyond the moment. A reactive person is enslaved to the emotions of right now. If they feel angry, they explode. If they feel discouraged, they quit. If they feel afraid, they freeze. A proactive person understands that emotions are temporary signals, not permanent realities. They pause long enough to ask, if I make this decision based only on how I feel right now, will it serve me tomorrow? Will it serve me in a year? That forward-looking perspective allows them to make decisions that align with long-term vision rather than short-term emotion. Proactive thinking is not about denying emotions, but about mastering them. Everyone feels fear, anger, disappointment, or doubt. The difference is that proactive thinkers don't let those emotions dictate their decisions. They acknowledge the emotion, but then choose the action based on vision, values, and purpose. That's how leaders are made. That's how success is built. By refusing to be driven by the winds of circumstance and instead steering by the compass of intention, you build a life that is consistent, resilient, and powerful. Over time, the practice of proactive thinking rewires your brain. What was once unnatural becomes instinctive. You train yourself to respond with calm when chaos arises, to respond with solutions when problems show up, to respond with courage when fear whispers. This is not just a mindset shift, it's a mastery skill. When you live proactively, you stop giving your power away to circumstances and people. You reclaim ownership of your energy, your time, and your future. That ownership creates a ripple effect in every area of life. It improves your relationships because you no longer react out of insecurity. It improves your finances because you make intentional choices instead of emotional ones. It improves your health because you prioritize long-term vitality over short-term comfort. The benefits compound because proactive thinking creates patterns that serve your highest outcomes. There is a way of thinking that multiplies everything it touches, and it begins when you stop asking yourself small, limited questions. Most people ask, what can I do? And that question keeps them stuck in addition thinking, where the best they can hope for is a little bit more than what they already have. Addition thinking says, if I work harder, I'll earn a little more. If I save longer, I'll eventually get ahead. If I sacrifice enough, maybe one day I'll be comfortable. The problem with addition is that it traps you in a slow grind, tied to time and effort as the only variables. But the people who create extraordinary results think in terms of multiplication. They don't just ask, what can I do? They ask, what can I multiply? What resource, skill, or idea can I leverage so that one effort produces 10 results? A multiplicative thinking begins with a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing your resources as limited, you start seeing them as seeds. A seed may look small, but when you plant it, water it, and nurture it, it multiplies into a tree that produces fruit for years to come. In the same way, one idea, one skill, or one relationship, if treated with vision and creativity, can multiply beyond your imagination. Think about someone who writes one book. That book can be printed thousands of times, translated into multiple languages, turned into audio, adapted into courses, and used to open doors for speaking engagements. One effort, multiple outputs. That is the mindset of multiplication. The danger of staying in addition thinking is that you will always be capped by your personal capacity. There are only so many hours you can work, only so much energy you can expend, only so many opportunities you can chase. But when you shift into multiplicative thinking, you stop trying to do everything by yourself and instead ask, how can I design systems, tools, and strategies that continue working even when I'm not? That's why people who operate with multiplication can achieve results that seem impossible to those still trapped in addition. They are no longer trading time for results. They are trading ideas, leverage, and strategy for exponential growth. Multiplicative thinking also changes the way you approach failure. In addition thinking, failure feels like subtraction. Like you lost ground you'll have to fight to regain. But in multiplication, failure becomes part of the formula because every mistake carries lessons that can multiply future success. Instead of asking, how much did I lose? You ask, what insight can I multiply from this setback? What experience can I extract that will save me years down the road? This shift allows you to move faster, experiment more, and grow quicker because you're no longer paralyzed by the fear of losing what little addition has given you. Another element of multiplicative thinking is collaboration. When you think in terms of addition, you often see others as competition because you believe resources are limited. But in multiplication, you look for partnerships because you understand that when aligned people and aligned skills come together, the results don't just add up, they compound. One person with a vision may impact hundreds, but when that vision is combined with the network expertise and creativity of others, it can impact millions. Multiplicative thinkers are not afraid to share credit or resources because they know that the pie doesn't shrink when shared, it expands. It's also about how you use your time. In addition thinking, time is something to be filled. In multiplication, time is something to be invested. A multiplicative thinker doesn't ask, how can I spend my day? But how can I use this day in a way that multiplies value into the future? That could mean creating a product instead of only providing a service, documenting a process instead of repeating it endlessly, or training others so that knowledge spreads beyond the individual. Every hour is measured not just by what it accomplishes in the moment, but by how many results it sets in motion for tomorrow. Perhaps the most powerful shift of all is the way multiplicative thinking forces you to raise your standards. You stop settling for incremental progress and start demanding exponential growth. You begin to measure opportunities not by what they give you today, but by how they can multiply tomorrow. You stop being satisfied with surviving or even just succeeding because you see the possibility of thriving and expanding. That standard changes the choices you make, the risks you take, and the vision you pursue. It forces you to play bigger, think wider, and act bolder because multiplication is not about scraping by, it's about overflowing. The mind is not a container that you fill once and then leave alone. It is a living environment that requires constant renewal. Just like a garden left unattended becomes overrun with weeds, a mind left without intentional cultivation becomes overrun with fear, doubt, negativity, and limitation. Every single day, ideas are competing for space in your head. Through the media you consume, the conversations you have, the environment you live in, if you don't deliberately choose what to plant, the world will plant whatever it wants, and you'll end up harvesting thoughts and attitudes that do not serve your growth. Renewal of the mind is the discipline of taking ownership over what gets planted and making sure what grows in you aligns with the future you want to build. When you think about growth, most people imagine it as a straight line, but growth actually happens in layers. Each new level of achievement or awareness requires a new level of thinking. You cannot solve tomorrow's problems with yesterday's mindset. The mind you had at one stage of life may have been enough to survive, but it will not be enough to thrive at the next stage. That's why people who stop renewing their minds find themselves stuck. They keep applying outdated ways of thinking to new challenges, and then they wonder why nothing is changing. Renewal means upgrading the operating system of your mind so it can handle bigger visions, greater responsibilities, and deeper opportunities. This renewal is not a one-time event. It's a daily practice. You don't eat one meal and expect to be nourished for life. In the same way, you cannot read one book, attend one seminar, or hear one inspiring message and expect it to carry you forever. The renewal of the mind requires consistent feeding, consistent stretching, consistent pruning. It means exposing yourself regularly to higher level ideas, surrounding yourself with people who challenge your limits, and choosing thoughts that elevate you rather than ones that drag you back into mediocrity. Renewal is the practice of staying in motion, of refusing to allow your inner world to go stagnant. The process often requires letting go as much as it requires taking in. To renew the mind, you must be willing to discard old thought patterns that no longer serve you. If you cling to every belief you've ever had, you'll never make room for new ones. Think of it like cleaning out a closet. Before you can bring in new clothes, you need to get rid of the ones that no longer fit. Renewal works the same way. You must identify thoughts that once may have been useful but have now become limitations, and then replace them with upgraded beliefs that match where you are going. One of the most powerful practices for renewing the mind is the deliberate use of repetition. Whatever you repeat, your brain begins to accept as normal. This is why affirmations, visualization, and intentional self-talk are not just motivational cliches, they are neurological strategies. When you continually speak and imagine higher thoughts, your brain begins to wire itself around those ideas. Over time, they stop feeling foreign and start feeling natural. And when they feel natural, your behavior flows from them without effort. Renewal then is not just about information, it's about transformation. And transformation happens when new patterns are rehearsed until they replace the old. Renewing the mind also requires guarding your inputs. You cannot expect to think thoughts of excellence while feeding your mind a steady diet of negativity and distraction. Just like you would be careful about what you put into your body if you want physical health, you must be careful about what you put into your mind if you want mental and emotional health. The conversations you engage in, the media you consume, the people you give your attention to, all of these are seeds. Renewal means making intentional choices about those inputs so that your inner environment remains fertile for growth and not poisoned by doubt or fear. Perhaps the most liberating part of renewing the mind is that it makes change possible at any stage of life. You are not bound by your past thoughts unless you choose to keep repeating them. No matter how long you've lived under a certain pattern, the moment you begin renewing your mind with new patterns, the trajectory of your life shifts. Renewal gives you access to a future that looks nothing like your history. It opens doors that seemed closed because it empowers you to see solutions and opportunities you would have overlooked before. It allows you to become the kind of person who can carry greater responsibility, create greater value, and live with greater clarity.